I'm Lisa Bickmore. I'm the Poet Laureate of Utah, and this festival began as an initiative of my predecessor, Paisley Rekdal, during her tenure as Poet Laureate. I'm so proud to be able to continue it. This festival would not be possible without the support, both logistical and financial, of Utah Humanities and the Division of Arts and Museums. This afternoon, Case Johnston is facilitating and hosting our Zoom. So thank you so much, Case. I know that you are all aware that arts funding and humanities funding is under strain and even attack, both at the state level and nationally. So please let your elected officials know how important events like this are to you and therefore the funding for them. Angelica, along with Patrick Ramsey and Olivia Dudding Rodriguez, helped me plan this festival. And so every brilliant thing that has happened today is the result of their efforts, intelligence, and invention. For this workshop, we will have your videos blank, but you will be able to speak in the workshop as a way of like just making it a little bit more informal. Let's see. You can also post questions in the Q&A, but with your voice enabled, you may not want to or need to do that. I'm going to encourage you to check out the virtual book fair and reading room at the festival website. Every person who has been a presenter, reader, panelist in the festival has material posted there that you can purchase or peruse. And I also just want to thank you for being here, for being part of the ecosystem of caring about literary arts in this state by making time for it. Okay, let me briefly introduce Angelica to you. Many of you probably already know her, but I just want to sing her praises one more time. She's a writer, artist, and a creativity enthusiast from Ogden, Utah, taught to read and write and embrace her creativity by a teenage mother and her almost entirely blind grandmother. She had a high school teacher who steered her to the mic for spoken word poetry, and she has returned to that high school to present and coach students about spoken word poetry and the power of creativity. And she's been featured in many, many programs, including the Utah Conference for Teachers of English, Kiwanis Club, Ogden Pride Festival, PBS Utah, the Standard Examiner Online, the Arts Festival, Ogden Arts Festival, Literary Deathmatch. There are so many. I'm not going to say them all, but I just want to say that Angelica is a force to be reckoned with, the Poet Laureate of Ogden, and your workshop facilitator. Thank you, Angelica.
Thank you so much for the beautiful introduction, Lisa. I hope everyone can hear me okay. It's an absolute honor to be here chatting with you all today. Lisa mentioned you are able to speak in this workshop if you choose to. I want to keep this pretty informal. We're having a conversation. I'll be sharing some things with you. We'll be working through some thought provocations and some prompts. We'll have some writing throughout the workshop and at the end. And this is an open conversation. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to chime in. I would love to interact with you all as we go. But thank you so much for being here today and for attending. So today we are going to be talking about voice, both as the writing element, but also finding your own internal voice. We're going to be talking about this in terms of writing itself, writing poetry specifically, and as a form of communication, and how all of those things can help one another the more that you nurture them. I think sometimes we think of writing as sort of just a skill that we develop or a hobby that some people do, maybe on the side, or a thing that people do for work. But those all are reasons that people write. And writing at its base really is a form of communication. When we try to think of writing as a way to communicate instead of just a skill or a thing that we do, it can really change our perspective on the reason that we are doing it, which I think is key to finding our voice, both our writing voice and just our communication voice in general. Now, I remember when I was learning about voice as a writing element, like in school, it became a little bit confusing for me because the way that I was trying to understand what voice in writing meant was this idea that I had to sort of create these identifiable things in the way that I wrote that people could pick up on, and that is what would create my voice. And I've grown over the years to not believe that to be accurate and to not look at voice in that way anymore. Um, it is, by definition, voice as a writing element is the way in which you as a person write that is unique to you. But that does not mean that everything that you write has to be some, uh, new profound thought that came of a formula that you've designed to kind of build your writing voice. The thing about voice is that we already have it in us and we use it all the time. We start learning how to use our voice in various different ways from the time that we are very, very little. This also doesn't mean that all of your writing needs to sound the same. And this was another place that I found myself getting caught up a lot. Um, Thinking, well, if I have these identifiable things that I use in my writing in this essay, that doesn't work the same way as when I'm writing a poem. And I don't want to use this thing that I use in a poem here in this essay. And it doesn't have to be that way because the thing about voice is it's sort of composed of the experiences that we've had, our own unique set of circumstances, uh, conversations that we've had, right? People that we know in our personal lives, we often can identify that they're the ones talking based on a lot of different things. Obviously, the actual tone of their voice, but we also recognize the cadence in which people speak. We notice the pace that they speak at. All of those things also can play a role into the way that you end up writing and how you find your voice. Again, I want to emphasize that the way that we communicate in other ways and the way that we communicate in writing can help each other to be more effective. So the reason that you are writing changes the type of voice that you're using. Now, when I say voice, I want to kind of reframe the way that you think about it to mean more you are speaking from a place that is authentic to you and you're telling the truth, whatever that means to you. That means that you are using your voice. That's all that voice really is the act of being honest. Being honest and being authentic to yourself sometimes means that you're pulling from different parts of yourselves to use in different situations, in different types of conversations. I'll use the example, let's say you work a desk job or you work a job maybe answering phones. The way that you answer the phone and communicate with someone in your customer service voice is a lot different than the way that you would communicate with your best friend of 10 years at lunch. You're going to use different elements of your personality, but they're still true to you. You're just drawing from different experiences and different things that you've learned. So I hope everyone has something to write with. We're going to go through a little experiment, I guess, a thought experiment. I want you to just start thinking of some things. If you feel inclined to write these things down, I would love for you to do that as well to reflect on later. We're going to go through a few of the reasons that we might have a conversation or that we might be communicating with someone. Because again, remember, writing is a form of communication. And we're going to try to kind of think of it as that instead of its own separate beast. So when I say we're having a conversation or we're communicating, this can be in writing or vocally or however else you may communicate. I'm going to share with you a few of the reasons that I could think of that we might have a conversation or communicate. Feel free again to jot these down or jot down any others that you think of. And if anyone else thinks of any, I would like to hear them as we go too, if you feel inclined to share. The first thing I thought of is that one of the reasons that we communicate is because we're trying to learn something. And so that might mean that we're asking a question or we're seeking clarity. Another reason I thought of was that we're trying to explain something. So we're trying to maybe teach, or we're trying to feel understood. To express would be another reason I thought of. We are trying to show emotion or give insight into a feeling, to connect with someone, trying to build a relationship or find a commonality with the person. There's also professional or formal obligations. So sometimes the reason we're having a conversation is so that we can get paid because we have to do it to get paid, or because if we don't have this conversation, a series of other things won't happen. Um, I also thought of the reason that we sometimes will have a conversation is to convince, which often would be a time that we would maybe be arguing something or trying to prove a point. Not always, though. This would be the same reason that you would use if maybe you worked in sales and you were trying to make that sale. You want to convince someone that they're making a good decision. Now, all of these things exist. These are different reasons to communicate, different things that you might be trying to do with your writing or with your communication. But that doesn't necessarily mean we need to pick one and assign it to the thing. It also, some of them can exist at once, more than one of these things can exist at one time. So I'd use the example if we're trying to convince, yes, we might be arguing or we might be trying to prove a point in that circumstance, but very rarely is that the only thing we're trying to accomplish with that style of communication. Often, along with trying to convince, we're also trying to express. We want the other person or the other group of people to know how we're feeling because we have a strong emotional response to it. Well, maybe we're trying to explain rather than solely convince. We want them to understand something so that they then can be convinced of something else. Um, so that can apply across the board. Did anyone else think of any other reasons that we might communicate that they feel open to sharing? You can also drop things in the Q&A too. I think Lisa mentioned earlier if you feel more comfortable typing, and I can see those there too. Okay, that's okay. So the way that we could, oh, somebody has their hand raised. Is it Lisa? Is that you that has it raised?
It is. It's me. No, I
Okay.
was just thinking, one of the things is I was sort of triangulating that list you gave us, trying to learn, trying to explain or make oneself understood, etc., as being like motives or motifs even for poems. Like I think about argument poems um, or trying to explain. There's this one poem of Billy Collins that I love, where he's trying to explain about this beautiful afternoon at a pool in Italy where he's slightly drunk. I mean, he just wants to make himself understood. And it's wonderful. It's a wonderful poem. Anyway, thank you for that list. I'm going to think about that some more.
Yeah, no, that's a great addition. Um, yeah, there's so many different reasons. I also like that you said motivations to write poems because that really is sort of what I'm hoping to get at here too, is for everyone to be able to see that the reasons that you're writing change the way in which you write or change the parts of your voice that you pull from, which I mentioned earlier, where your voice already exists inside of you, and you also actually really know how to use those things already. That's why I use that example of we already know how to adapt to being at work versus being with friends. We already know how to kind of do those things. So when we're trying to find our voice, it is more, I think, about why. Why are you trying to communicate it at all? I see in the Q&A as well, another reason for communicating would be for enjoyment or for laughter. And I love that too. Telling a joke, reflecting on a funny memory with someone. I'd say that that kind of goes hand in hand as well with trying to connect with a person. Um, I think earlier in my example, I used trying to connect, and I was thinking of it more as I've just met a person. This is a new person in my life, and I'm trying to find something in common with them, or I'm trying to communicate with them in some way. But we also try to connect with people we already know and have established relationships with. And I think that's one of the ways that we do that amongst a bunch of others. Does anyone else have reasons that they feel comfortable sharing? This is such a great group, and I'm so grateful to you all for being here. So I want to add on a bit to the point that based on the conversation that we are having, um, the way that we communicate with a person and the way that we use our voice changes, again, be it in writing or in other ways. This comes from a bunch of different factors. Some of this is societal expectations, right? And I keep gonna keep kind of jumping back to that contrast comparison I used earlier. Um, we have learned what it means to be professional. And so we'll utilize those aspects of our personality in a way that's still true to us, but we will uh, use that, in a different way. Um, when we're having a more personal relationship conversation with someone that we already have an established relationship with, or we're, reflecting on a funny memory like we were talking about, we know how to do that already. We're just drawing from a different part of our personality. One personal reference that I like to give is when I sign off an email, I almost always just use thank you so much, or thanks, or thank you, with an exclamation point almost every time, even though it makes more sense for it to be a comma and then my signature, right? But I always do it in that way. But I love when people sign off their emails with things like warmly or in best regards, or, those really like, I don't know, warm email sign-offs. It's just a silly thing that I notice, but it doesn't feel true to me to use an email sign-off like that. Because if I was communicating in that regard out loud, I wouldn't say those things. And so for me, it feels unnatural. Now, that doesn't have to apply to everyone. That doesn't mean either way is right or wrong. That just means to me in my voice, it feels uncomfortable and it doesn't feel accurate for me. However, I do love a good sign off. And also, I'm a writer at heart, and I always wanted a nice little sign off like that. And so my writing alias is signed AB, as if I was signing off a letter, because that is the way that I view my writing, is as a letter from me to someone, personal, sort of narrative writing or communication writing. And so even though that thing doesn't apply to like my email signature, it still applies to another part of my voice and another part of my personality. I hope that all makes sense. Does anyone have any questions before we jump into the prompt? Okay, great. So we're going to jump into a prompt here that I hope will show some of what we're talking about, and you can kind of see it in action for yourself. Now, I want you guys to think back about small talk conversations. We are all sort of loaded with a couple of questions. We've got like a little hard drive in our brain somewhere with a couple of questions that we throw out for small talk. And one of those questions is, what is your favorite color? Now, I feel strongly about this question because I also think that from the time that we are children, we are taught, even if we don't realize it, that we are going to be asked this at any point. This could be asked to you. And so you need to have an answer prepared. And everyone I know has a favorite color. It's predetermined. If someone asks what their favorite color is, they know what the answer is and they can give it. We also know that that's a question you can ask if you don't know what to ask to someone you're trying to get to know or you're trying to connect with. So that's what we're going to use for the prompt is this sort of general idea of a favorite color because we can all, I would imagine, agree that we have been asked a time or two what our favorite color is. So with your writing utensil and thing to write with or type with, however you choose to write, I want you all to take a moment. And these are going to be, we're not going to take a lot of time on each of these because we're going to go through a few. But I want you to just write a general blurb about your favorite color. If I said, what's your favorite color? Just generally speaking, how would you answer it? And write that down. I'm going to mute my mic while we're doing the prompts. Okay. Hope everyone was able to jot something down. If you still need a second, feel free to continue. I'm going to share mine and just a really, really quick passing story of why I always answer this way. My favorite color is purple, specifically a shade somewhere between lavender and a true purple, not too loud, not too soft. That's how I would describe my favorite color. Got brought up to me once in a class with young people that when you say the color purple to a group, they or just to a person, they either think of lavender or like a true, kind of louder, rich purple. And those have sort of different emotional responses for people. So now I always feel the need to clarify. Um, but that would be my just kind of default answer that I have in my brain. Now, answering the same question, I want you to imagine that you are texting with someone and you're going to send them a text message about your favorite color. You can choose whether you are just telling them or if they asked what your favorite color was and you're responding. But again, write it down as if you were texting it. Okay. I hope that that was all enough time for everybody. I feel like that's probably the fastest one because a lot of us, I don't know, maybe I'm just speaking from personal experience, but I feel like when I'm texting, it's a different, faster type of communication. I'm going to share what I wrote here so that I can paint the picture later of what we're going to talk about at the end of this prompt series here. But I wrote, my fave color is purple. What about you? Nothing capitalized because I have my auto capitalization turned off when I'm texting. Okay, now I want you to again write just a short little thing about your favorite color, but this time I want you to imagine that you are writing and sending in the mail a handwritten letter to a person. And you're going to, go buy a stamp and actually physically mail this to whoever you're sending it to. I'm going to mute my mic for a moment. Okay. Again, you can always come back to these later. I'm going to share a little bit again for the sake of the conversation we'll have after. I write, Dear Utah Poetry Festival attendees, comma, and a drop down. I'm writing to tell you about my favorite color. I am a fan of a medium shade of purple, not too loud, not too soft either. I hope you are all doing well. Love, Angelica, but always a heart, a slash, and then my name, because that is how I would write it. And now the last blurb that we're going to do here is we're going to try to write, again, the same thing, your favorite color, but I want you to write it as if you were sending a formal professional email to a colleague or someone that you had some sort of business relationship with. Um, again, a formal professional email. Okay. And now, again, I'll share with you what I wrote and point out some of the differences. I write, "Hello, Utah Poetry Festival. I hope this message finds you well. I am writing to inform you of my favorite color, purple. Let me know if you have any questions. Thank you, Angelica Brewer, first and last name." It's really similar, if you'll notice, to the handwritten letter in the way that I wrote it. But there's just a few differences in the sign off. Instead of saying dear, I say hello. I say inform instead of saying tell you. So these are some of those things that I'm mentioning that I wanted you all to notice about your own um, writing here, is that there are things that you've already determined are ways that you write in different situations, circumstances, based on who you are communicating with. Did anyone notice anything else that was significant and different from the three? Or four, I guess it was, because we did a blurb at the beginning. Yes, Lisa, thank you.
Apparently, I have a lot to say.
I
Um,
appreciate it.
I I had fun with this actually because I thought, well, if I'm writing a professional letter, I'm going to say asking personal details is an HR matter, and so I I had fun writing these. That's all, and I think so. That's another piece of the voice puzzle, right? Which is you can assume a voice for a purpose that's congruent with the stated purpose or that's at variance with it, and that's fun. That's a fun part of writing.
Yes, it really is. I think it's the fun part too. And why I really wanted to highlight those differences too is because of that confusion that I had early on in learning, how to use my own writing voice. It doesn't have to be all of those things that I wrote about the same thing don't sound exactly the same. And it doesn't need to sound exactly the same to still be an effective use of voice. But they were all still true to how I personally would write it. Now, when we write poetry, we've been talking a lot about the reasons for communicating, and this is where we wanted to get to because this is, of course, still the Utah Poetry Festival. When we write poetry, the reasons often come down to trying to get maybe to the bare roots of a complicated feeling or an emotion. Maybe we're trying to process a more complex experience or find words for something that we can't find words for in these other circumstances. Um, Poetry is a place where we come to break rules and to experiment. We can let some of those things, kind of push them out the door a bit. We don't need to worry so much. And there is still, of course, technical elements to writing poetry, but there are no rules. There are no, societal expectations. It's a different experience because of what people often are drawn to poetry for. It just so happens that that tends to be a thing that makes people feel intimidated by poetry often as well. Poetry exists in the silences of conversations. It's not, the situations aren't as widely applicable. We send a lot of emails, we send a lot of text messages. We have a lot of sort of small talk conversations. So we have a lot of information to use as a base for our voice in those cases. But with poetry, because that is often the reason has to do with us trying to make sense of something, we don't have as much groundwork. And so it is experimental and it is a place to try and use elements of your voice in places that aren't appropriate, and to kind of break some of those rules that you've set for yourself and the parameters in which you pull parts of your voice from. Poetry requires you to rely on that voice because there are not those. I'm speaking really generally. I know there is some nuance to this, but for the most part, there's no kind of like box you can put poetry into. But I think that's the most beautiful thing about it. Now, going back to the reason, when someone asks you your favorite color, because we've sort of mostly been asked that question in a get to know your classmates, get to know your coworkers, trying to get to know someone new. I just pulled that question out because it's the first thing I thought of. Those are the reasons that we are often using that question. And because we have programmed answers usually for that question, we don't think often about the whys behind our favorite colors anymore. Um, but the truth of it is, and the silence in the conversation is that people's favorite color is often determined by the response that they have to sensory information. And this is how a lot of our feelings are determined. We all respond differently to sensory information. And so when I see certain colors, it makes me feel a certain way that maybe I associate in comfortable or uncomfortable. I put them into categories, and that isn't the same for everyone. Um, so if I really start trying to dig into the root of why I have the favorite color that I have, and that feels more like a poem there than just answering the question. So now we're going to, for our last prompt, we are going to write about our favorite color again. But this time, I want you to only use sensory details about your favorite color. When I say that, I mean you can use taste, smell, touch, hear, all five senses. And see, I think, is the one that I missed. You can use all of those to describe your color. So for example, I could say my favorite color smells like the lilac bush in my grandma's front yard when I was growing up, or it tastes like a wine grape picked straight off of the vine. Do you see how describing the color in this way already somehow feels more poetic? And it doesn't have as much to do with the words I chose to use. I actually used really, sort of uh, just forward words. There's not a whole lot of special into the way that I picked the words. It's more about the fact that we're describing a color in a way that a color isn't usually described. So anyway, that is going to be our final prompt before we open up for questions. And we're going to take a little bit longer on this one. I want you to try to use as many sensory details as you can, but the catch is that you can't say the name of your favorite color. So we're only going to use those sensory descriptions of your favorite color, what it looks like, what it would taste like, what it would sound like. Um, you can do this however you want. There's no right or wrong way to do this, and we're all going to have different answers, even if we all wrote about the same color, because we all respond differently. So I'm going to give everybody about 5 minutes to go for it and write your favorite color in only sensory details. right, everyone. We took about 5 minutes. Get to a good stopping point on your writing. And I'd love to hear if anyone feels inclined to share what they wrote about their favorite color. You can raise hand or just begin talking. I think you should be able to unmute your own sound as well.
I'll read mine.
Okay, thanks, Lisa.
Taste like air, like water, like a stir of wind. I could hold it to the sky, turn a wheel of its gradations to name its exact tone, but it shifts like clouds, seethes with light. Its music is, of course, a little sad. When I touch it, it parts like my hand parts the surface of a pool. It eddies, ripples, its scent faint, melting into its atmosphere. As the core of a lit match flame, it hallucinates itself. It dissolves.
Beautiful. Thank you, Lisa. I am getting a blue from that. What can you tell us what your favorite color was?
Yes, it's blue. But I
Yes.
might have to report this to HR because you've asked me a personal question in a
Oh,
work
right.
environment.
Right. We're in a professional circumstance here. Yes. No, that is great. Um, so what I loved about that, Lisa, and about this prompt is that we don't realize how in tune we are with our sensory information until someone shares something like that with us, where you did not once say that your favorite color was blue, but instead you painted all these different pictures that implied blue to us and kind of gave us enough sensory information to gather that. And I think that is key to writing poetry. Would anyone else feel comfortable to share their favorite color writing? I see Jess's hand is raised.
I guess I could have just started talking, huh?
Yeah, that's okay though.
Um, so mine's not as poetic as Lisa's was, and I actually did it in bullet points. Um, so I wrote the way that trees look in vampire movies, um, the way that it smells when we first get to our cabin in the summertime, um, the exact way Christmas morning smells, but only if it's snowed outside, and a shade almost that is almost black, but when you look at it in the sunlight, it's not.
Ooh,
It's a tricky one because it's not a very common. I mean, it is a common color, but the specific shade maybe is not.
yeah. At first I was getting a I like how I've turned this somehow into a let me try to guess your guys' favorite colors game. At first I was getting a maybe like a burnt orange type of color. But then I got a maybe like a really dark green.
Yeah, so dark green, and maybe I should just kept it with the trees and vampire movies because that's typically if you think of like the Twilight movies and whatnot, it's that like eerie dark green, almost black color of the trees.
Yeah, you're so right. For some reason I had my brain went to that all vampire movies invert the colors, which is not true, and I don't know really where I got that from. So, but I appreciate you sharing your great description of your favorite color. And bullet points are a totally valid way to do this prompt. So
Sweet,
thank
thanks for the prompt. It was kind of fun to write things down, but now my wrist hurts, so I'm going to take a break.
you. That's fair. Thank you for sharing. Does anyone else feel like sharing their favorite color writing? I feel like a circus game or something now. Like, let me guess your favorite color. Nonetheless, I want to hear though. Hey, that's okay. If anyone feels so inclined to share at any point over the next 10 minutes, the floor will
Star
still be
has her hand
open.
up.
Oh, who does? I didn't even see it.
Star Colbert does.
Oh, Star. I'm so sorry. I didn't even see the hand raise. Please feel free to unmute and share.
Thank you, Angelica. I'm enjoying this little color exercise. I always veer from the prompt, but I've written about colors, and you can guess what these are about. I have a lot of favorite colors, and so I'm sure you'll know the colors, but what are they the colors of? Dark chocolate with espresso chips, polished sea glass, originally a mason jar, kaleidoscope tumbling in shades of moss, grass, linden, and sage, encircled by elm bark, dredged in sugar sap, and the window of sky just before sunset, lit by glints of ice.
Beautiful. I got a whole color palette from your writing there. I was getting like a jewel toned palette, rich colors, colorful though. What colors did you have in mind when you were writing?
Eye color, color
Ooh.
of ice.
Oh, yeah.
I started with your eyes, dark chocolate with espresso chips.
Oh, well, that's gonna make me emotional. That is so fantastic. Thank you. Um, but that's beautiful. Yeah, you're so right about that. What a great way to describe eye color. And there's so many variations, and you hit the nail with that one. That was great. Thank you so much for sharing, Star. That was fantastic. Um, yeah, so I hope that you all feel more in touch with ways to use your voice and the reasons and the things that you're trying to communicate. You've all really set the framework for a poem with your last color blurb writing. Um, I would love it if you would explore with this later, but regardless, consider the things that we've talked about today about your voice. And when you go to write poems and write poetry, um, recognize that I think sometimes we can get caught up in um, using bigger, more poetic sounding words to describe something, which is still a valid way of writing poetry. However, it doesn't always have to be that way. And sometimes it can just be about what part of a thing you're choosing to describe or talk about. The parts that are quiet, um, it's a place again for you to break rules and experiment. Poetry is a really interesting way to use your voice for that reason. I would love to open up the remaining time for any questions or comments anyone might have. Um, and we'll do that until uh, the workshop ends here in just a couple of minutes. But thank you all so much for being here. I hope you've enjoyed your Utah Poetry Festival. And thank you, Lisa, and thank you, Case, for organizing this Zoom and making these workshops and panels and readings and programming accessible and free and online for our communities. So does anyone have any questions or comments? I'm keeping out for hand raises, but also please feel free to just talk if you're able to unmute yourself as well or type in the
Angelica,
Q&A. Yes.
I was just wondering if you would say a few words about your own work as a spoken word artist and as a open mic slam style poet. How do your thoughts about voice in this sense connect with actually giving voice to your poems?
Sure, that's a great question. When I am sharing my poetry, I try to still pull from all the things we talked about today. I pull from my kind of vault of how I would communicate a sentence or a thing. Obviously, poetry often is written in ways that do not align with the same kind of rhythm that I would use when I'm generally speaking. That's kind of like the whole thing about writing poems is that there's sort of a rhythmic nature to it. There's line breaks and places that you wouldn't break a line when you're speaking out loud. And so what I'm doing when I'm sharing poetry out loud is staying true to my speaking voice as it is and the cadence in which I talk in normally, the volume that I talk in normally, other than, being a little bit louder depending on if I have a microphone or not, those kinds of little details. But then when I'm actually writing, I am thinking about that. I'm thinking about how it's going to sound out loud and how I intend. Now, this doesn't mean that the person reading a poem always reads it the way we intended it to sound. But if I could control the person who's reading it, the voice that they're reading in their head, what would it sound like? What does it sound like in my head when I'm writing it? And then I try to reflect that out loud. There's, emphasis on certain words or parts of a sentence that maybe in my natural speaking voice, I wouldn't put the emphasis there. But when I wrote it, I intended there to be emphasis there. So when I say it out loud, I'm going to put that emphasis there. Does that make sense or answer your question okay?
That's awesome. Thank you so much.
Of course. Thank you so much, Logan. I appreciate you being here. And yes, voice can be flexible. And it is something, like I said, that we all have in us already. You can do work to hone in on it and practice, but really you have the skills that you need already to be able to effectively use the voice in your writing. So anyway, I really appreciate you being here, and thanks for dropping that in the Q&A there. Does anyone have anything else? Jess, I see your hand raised.
Yeah, I just wanted to say because I've tried writing poetry before, and obviously you've been a big inspiration in that. But I've always struggled with how to make simple things sound more exciting. And the five senses thing was really helpful to kind of being able to describe things in a way that maybe sounds a little bit more poetic. So I'm appreciative of that, and I did get some good things out of this workshop.
That's great. Thank you so much for sharing. And yeah, I mean, I agree. I think when we see this in my classroom settings a lot too, where it's kind of a thing that we think that poetry needs to be written in complex, almost confusing language to be poetry. And sometimes there's a place for that, to use this really complex or maybe complicated language. But a lot of the time, like I said, it has more to do with the thing that you are saying. That's kind of generic, but they say it has more to do with the way that you say something than what you're actually saying. And I think that applies to poetry too. So anyway, great comments. I'm glad you got something out of the workshop, and thank you for being here. We have about 1 minute left if anyone has a rapid fire question. But if not, I'm going to pass the time back over to Lisa, and thank you all so much for being here and spending your Saturday afternoon with me. I've had a great time.
Thank you so much, Angelica, and what a pleasure it has been to think and write with you today. Thanks to all of you attendees who came to the workshop. I hope that you had a good time as well. Let me just remind you that there's one more event to the Utah Poetry Festival, as well as a host of poetry events happening throughout the state for the rest of the month. But tonight, Ben Gunsberg and Jaya Hamid Bashir will be reading at 7. So you can find the link on the festival schedule page, and I hope to see all of you there. Good night. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa.
Bye-bye.